All right, guys, Darren from FBA Elite, and welcome back to another video. So in this week's video, we're going to be comparing Amazon FBA private label and Amazon FBA arbitrage. So most people have heard of Amazon FBA, but not everyone is aware that there actually are different ways of making money with Amazon FBA. But the two most common models that you'll see promoted and talked about on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, etc., are private label and arbitrage. And when we're talking about arbitrage, we're covering both retail and online arbitrage. So if you've looked into that already, you should know what I mean. So I've got this list together of all of the things that I think are worth noting. I've done both of these. So I've been a private label seller since 2018. And earlier on this year, I spent a few months and did about £15,000 worth of arbitrage selling. So I've got a really good understanding of both. I can hopefully tell you the pros and cons of both, and then you can choose the right fit for you. So firstly, what is the difference between arbitrage and private label? Well, arbitrage is the reselling of established brands and products. So not your own products and not your own brand. You know, you might go and resell Lego products, for example. Whereas private label is developing your own brand and developing your own products. And both of them use Amazon FBA, i.e. you send the inventory into Amazon and you use Amazon to sell the products and Amazon to fulfill the orders and manage the customer service. So we're using Amazon FBA for both, but there are differences in the approach. So the next question, where do you buy inventory for each of these business models? Well, with arbitrage, you have two choices. You have online arbitrage or retail arbitrage. Now, most people do one or the other, whereas some people will do both. So you can either buy all of your stock going online and looking for deals online, or you can go to physical retail stores and buy your products there instead. With private label, we're usually sourcing through Alibaba.com or other sites like that, where we're basically contacting suppliers in China and buying stuff in bulk. So with private label, you're usually buying in much higher quantities, whereas with arbitrage, you're usually buying much smaller quantities. Now, barrier to entry. And this is one of the reasons why arbitrage gets a lot of coverage on TikTok, is the barrier to entry to arbitrage is very low. You do not need a huge amount of money, and there isn't as much involved with arbitrage as there is with private label. And that will become clearer as we go through this video. So the barrier to entry for arbitrage, whether online or retail, is low, but you do need a lot more time. Whereas with private label, there is a medium barrier to entry. But like I say, it should become clear as I go through this video. So the next question, if the barrier to entry is low, how much money do you need? Well, I've got roughly £500 for retail arbitrage and £2,000 to £3,000 for private label. And the main reason for this is, one, you are buying much smaller quantities of stock for retail arbitrage, and you also don't need to do any marketing. So you don't need as big a budget. Whereas for private label, if you have less than £2,000 or £3,000, you're going to really struggle. So what we see some people recommend is, if you want to do private label but don't quite have enough budget, do some arbitrage to build up that capital. And to be fair, that is a reasonable recommendation, but it also may be something you don't want to do, which again will become clearer as we go through the rest of this video. Next up, competition. So I've got competition for online and retail arbitrage is extremely high. This is being promoted everywhere at the moment because of the low barrier to entry and because you don't need much of a budget to get involved. There is very high competition for selling arbitrage products on Amazon. Whereas private label, yes, there is competition, but with the correct research, you can reduce that competition quite substantially. So one does have a much lower barrier to entry, but that does have the trade-off that competition is much higher. Whereas with private label, you need a much bigger budget, but the competition is a bit less. Now, return on investment potential. This is something you might see people disagree with in the comments, and it's going to be very much based on people's own experiences. But from when I have done both of these, with online arbitrage, you're probably looking to make anywhere between 15 to 30% return on investment. So for every £100 you invest, you're looking to make that £100 back plus about 15 to £30 of profit. Now, if you're doing retail arbitrage, so you're actually going to the physical stores, in my experience, there's more opportunity to make more money as some of the offers are better, but it is a lot more time consuming than online arbitrage. Whereas with private label, I always recommend to all of the people that I teach, aim for a minimum of 80%. So if you're investing £100, then you're looking to make that £100 back plus an extra £80 on top. And this is certainly doable, and this is what I've been doing for the past 5 years or so. So I know this is possible, and I know this is what other people have experienced when they've done online and retail arbitrage, and also what I experienced when I was doing it earlier this year. The next one is also very interesting, which is the turnaround or the speed of the return on investment. So with arbitrage, if you're buying online, it's usually getting delivered next day, or if you're buying in the shop, you've got the stock there straight away. It's then going to take you about a week or so to get that product to Amazon. So you'll package it up, you'll create the shipping plan in Seller Central. UPS will usually come and collect it, or you can take it to UPS. It'll take a few days getting delivered, and then another few days on top of that getting processed into stock. Depending on how much inventory you'd ordered, it's then going to take another week or two to sell through, potentially a bit longer. And then Amazon will disperse the payment, so the profit on that, 7 days after confirmed delivery of the product. So overall, around about 3 to 4 weeks to kind of cycle that money through. So if you invest £100 in inventory, it's going to be 3 to 4 weeks before you get that £100 back plus any profit on top. Whereas private label, things are a bit more drawn out because you're ordering from China, so you're buying in bulk. The products have got to be manufactured, which takes a few weeks. They've got to be shipped to the UK, which is going to take another month. And it's going to take another month or two to sell through that inventory. So the time it takes to make money on your investment is longer, but the ROI is much higher, 80% rather than at 15 to 30%. So it's finding that balance between the two. We now have passive income potential. And the truth is, neither of these are completely passive, but private label has the potential to be a lot more passive. So starting with arbitrage first, the passive potential of arbitrage, if you're doing it yourself, is very, very low because you have to spend so much time sourcing products, and you need to be sourcing every single day. Otherwise, you just run out of inventory. Or if you're using prep centers. So if you're not processing the stock yourself, which most newbies are going to be doing, if you don't pay for a prep center, it has very low passive income potential. Now, you're going to see some of the people on Twitter and YouTube and the other platforms saying that Amazon FBA can be passive, and to go and just hire a few VAs and send it all to a prep center. But you need to run this business model yourself first for a number of months and experience it fully before you even start to consider outsourcing any of this, as there are so many things to trip you up. And that is one of the biggest things of arbitrage. There are so many pitfalls that they just gloss over when they're promoting this business model. Now, with private label, it is very high. Once you've got your product, the passive income potential does become very high, depending on how much you want to grow the business. Say, for example, you launch one product and you want to make £1,000 per month. Once you've launched that product and got it established, you might spend maybe 1 hour to 2 hours per week managing that. And that'll be a case of logging in, checking how the sales are going, managing any customer queries that have come through, but 99% of them go to Amazon, not to you. So there's very, very little customer query management to do. You might contact your supplier to reorder some stock every couple of months. So overall, it becomes very, very passive once it's up and running. Whereas arbitrage, unless you're outsourcing your sourcing to VAs, i.e. virtual assistants are going to find products for you, and then you need to review those and actually order them. But even just ordering inventory takes loads of time with arbitrage. Whereas a private label, it does have a much higher passive income potential. So what is the most time-consuming element of these business models? Well, with arbitrage, it is sourcing and prep. And I've put both of those, as you'll be doing both of those on a daily basis. So a lot of people look to start Amazon FBA as a side hustle. And I can tell you this, if you do not have a lot of spare time, you will struggle to make decent returns with arbitrage, because the amount of times you'll spend sourcing, like I say, you need to source daily, and you're prepping almost daily as well. Now, when I did arbitrage back in April, May time, and we did about 15 grand of sales there, 900 units sold. That was over a couple of months, and you can see there, I did it for a couple of months and I thought, this is not the business model that I wanted to operate. I just wanted to test it so I could fully understand it. And I made a couple of grand doing that. But the amount of work that was involved to do that was crazy. So that is why I've put the most time-consuming element as sourcing and prep, as you'll probably be surprised how long it takes to receive a product, package it to Amazon spec, then see how many kind of in a Jenga style products you can get into one box to minimize your logistics costs. It takes up a lot of time and a lot more than people realize. Now, with private label, Finding products is also one of the most time-consuming tasks. However, when we're doing private label, for some reason we all call it product research, yet when we're finding products for arbitrage, we all call it product sourcing. But that's just the words that we use online. But product research, the good thing is with product research is once you've found that one product that you want to launch, you don't have to do product research again until you want to launch your next product. So yes, product research is very time-consuming, but once you've found that product, then it isn't. So that's why it's there as the most time-consuming element, but long-term it isn't, because once the product's established, you don't have to do much of it until you launch your next product. The next thing you need to know about is software. So for arbitrage, there was 4 pieces of software that I was using. We had Keeper, which allowed me to see the sales history of the product, the price point as well, to see whether the price that you're looking to sell at is actually sustainable long-term, or whether we're just seeing a peak or a trough on Amazon at that particular time. Also can see the number of sellers that have been selling that listing historically. So you're looking at to see whether you've actually got a good chance of selling this product, or whether you're going to get problems with your account if you do, which I'll come back to later on in this video. You then have Seller Amp, which allowed you to do product analysis, so you can analyze things like demand and see what the profit margins were like and see if there's any issue with hazmat, etc. You then had Seller Toolkit, which was inventory management and seeing your profits and your return on investment. And then your repricer, as you're selling on existing listings, you're constantly repricing your products to remain competitive with the other sellers on that listing. Now with private label, you only need Helium 10, but in fairness, the total cost of these pieces of software and Helium 10 are actually quite comparable. So I'm not saying one is cheaper than the other. And I actually did use Helium 10 to help me out with my arbitrage business as well, as it gave me extra tools, and I like using Helium 10. I'll pop the usual discount codes in the pinned top comment. We then have storage requirements. So with arbitrage, you need high storage requirements. Like my office now is currently full of racking that I didn't have when I was just doing private label. So I've got 3 or 4 big racks in my office for when I was doing arbitrage. So again, unless you're outsourcing to a prep center, you need to have plenty of space in your office or your bedroom or your garage, whatever it is, to receive that stock. Whereas private label, the storage requirements are very low. The only time you may need storage requirements is if your storage threshold on Amazon drops too much and Amazon won't accept kind of the large quantities you're ordering. You might want to arrange third-party storage, which is what I use from time to time. They receive the goods, and then when I've got space at Amazon, I'll send in another couple of pallets at a time. So, but you shouldn't need storage facilities at home for private label, but you probably will do for arbitrage. Selling restrictions. Now, this is something you'll come across very quickly when you start arbitrage, and a bit later when you start private label. So when you start selling established brands on Amazon, you're going to find 2 things. One, you're gated in some categories, so you might not be allowed to sell in groceries, for example. And then within groceries, or within all of the categories you're looking at, there's going to be brands that you can't sell. And as a new seller, you're going to be brand gated for probably over 90% of the products on Amazon. And there are 2 ways really to get ungated. One is to build a sales history. So the more you sell, the more brands will unlock for you. And I found once I've done about £1,000 worth of sales, I could sell probably 9 out of 10 brands. And the ones that you couldn't, you need to order at least a quantity of 10 from a suitable supplier and then send that invoice to Amazon, and hopefully they will ungate you to be allowed to sell that product. So if you found, for example, a particular Lego product you wanted to sell, Amazon would not allow you to become a seller straight away. You'd have to order 10 of them, send to Amazon the invoice, get permission, and once you've got permission, you can then send that inventory into Amazon and try and sell it. Now with private label, you don't really have that particular issue as you're not selling other people's brands. But when you come to create your own brand, they're going to want to see proof of that. So normally once you've ordered a sample of your product with your brand on, take a photo of your sample with your brand on it, and Amazon should approve you to sell your own brand. We then have reviews, and this is something that's covered a lot in the private label business, but it's also important in arbitrage as well, but in a slightly different way. So with arbitrage, it's all about seller feedback. So if you've got a listing with 10 or 20 sellers in there, Amazon, as part of their algorithm, will award the buy box to the seller that ticks the most boxes. Now, whether that's the amount of inventory they've got in stock or their price point or how much seller feedback they've got. So it's very important to have good seller feedback. Now, as a private label seller, seller feedback is almost irrelevant, and it all comes down to product reviews and ratings. The higher that your product is rated, the better chance it is that it's going to convert and the more sales you're going to make. So They're both important, but for different ways for each of the business models. So PPC and marketing doesn't really apply to arbitrage. You don't need to do any PPC or marketing as you are listing on established listings that are already selling on Amazon, whereas it's essential for private label. You are going to be investing in, at a minimum, PPC. You might not do other marketing, but you need to do PPC so that you can generate sales for your listing, so your listing goes up in the organic ranks and you can start making some really highly profitable sales. Now, some common risks here. Now, these can apply to either business model, but I'm just going to try and cover the ones that apply specifically to each of the business models. So just because I say it for one doesn't mean there isn't a chance it won't happen with the other model. So common risks for arbitrage. You've got IP complaints, and this is probably the biggest risk. So as you're selling on other people's listings, if the listing owner decides that they don't want you on there as a seller, they can submit an IP complaint, which can cause you real issues with your account. You won't be allowed to sell that product. And I've heard stories of people with new accounts getting their account suspended with as little as one IP complaint. Now, IP complaints, if you can't overturn them, you'll need a valid invoice chain to do this, and also getting the person that submitted the complaint to withdraw the complaint. So it's actually quite unlikely. They will disappear off your account after 6 months. But if you get one or two of those as a new seller, there's a high chance your account is going to be suspended. So IP complaints are a massive risk of being an arbitrage seller. You then have price tanking. So for example, you may see a product that sells for £30 on Amazon at the moment, and you can source it for £15 and you think there's profits to be made. But by the time you've got that product and you've sent it into the Amazon fulfillment center and it's taken a few days to be processed into stock, loads of other sellers have done the same thing. And all of a sudden that price starts tanking from £30 down to 28 to 26 to 24. And sometimes it ends up being a race to the bottom. And because arbitrage has a low barrier to entry, you see this a lot. So you have to be very, very careful. You have to look through the sales history for individual products to see how they've performed in the past, and then try and make your best judgment as to whether this product is like to be price tanked as well. The simple rule of thumb is the easier it was for you to find the deal, the more chance there is it's going to be price tanked. So if someone goes and posts it on hotukdeals.com or something like that, then everyone's going to see that deal. So you need to be sourcing in smarter ways, different ways to other people if you want to make decent profits. You have the risk of listing removal. So as an example of this, I'd ordered, I think, 20 packs of Twinings tea that I was reselling with arbitrage. And all of a sudden that listing got suspended. And because it wasn't my listing, there was nothing I could do about it. And I just had these 20 packets of tea that I had to recall. And they're still actually sitting up there on my rack. So listings can just get removed. And because they're not your listings, you have no recourse to do anything about it. And logistics, which is a potential issue for both models. Logistics is a bigger issue for arbitrage because there's so many products involved. So if you're buying a product on private label, you might be buying 500 units or 1,000 units, and then you're shipping in a few pallets to Amazon. It's quite straightforward, and if something's missing, it's really obvious. Whereas with this, you could be sending 40 to 50 different products per box, and then Amazon might have issues with different products within there, so some might be damaged or some might be missing. And also, when you actually order these products in the first place, the amount of retail outlets that actually mess up the orders, and also will send you damaged goods as well. So there's so much more that goes on from a logistic point of view with regards to missing and damaged inventory. So you have to be very, very hot on that. Otherwise, you will lose a lot of money if you don't track that fully. Now with private label, the risk is slightly different. It is more of a patent stroke design infringement risk. So as you're developing or you're enhancing existing products, you have to do patent searches on these to make sure you're not developing a product that already has a patent and then you're just going to get kicked off when the owner of that patent complains about that. So many of the products sold on Amazon actually don't have patents or design protections, but it's still worth doing these searches. So the last thing you want to do is spend a few weeks or a few months finding the right product, developing it, then you launch it, and then it gets suspended because someone says, look, I've got the patent or design right for that particular product, and these guys are copying me. So that's a risk to be aware of. You also have listing hijackers, which is actually what happens with arbitrage. You have one listing with multiple sellers on it, but with private label, it should be one listing with only you as the seller. And if another seller comes on, they're called a hijacker because they're jumping on your listing, and they won't be selling your product because they're not going to have the exact same product as your product has got branding. So they might be selling a generic product, in which case you can get them kicked off the listing, but you need protection, which I'm going to come back to later on in this video. And there's also the risk, and this is a risk with arbitrage, but the risk is much smaller as you can see the proven demand and the listing already has that sales history. But as you're launching your own product with a new listing, you may not sell. There's no guarantee customers are going to want to buy your product and you have no proof of that. But if you do the correct research and the correct analysis, you will mitigate those risks or minimize them as much as possible. This next point, Amazon listing. So with Arbitrage, you're using existing listings, you're doing all of your research, analyzing those listings and becoming a seller on the listings that you think are suitable. Whereas with private label, you are creating your own listing. So it does take more time and money as you need to do your own photography. You've got to write your own content. You've got to optimize that content. You've got to make sure you get a good amount of reviews, and you actually got to launch that product as well. So there's much more involved in that side of things, actually creating the listing and getting it up and running versus just jumping onto someone else's listing. Now, in terms of protection, there's absolutely no protection for arbitrage sellers. That's it. There's nothing else to add. There is no protection for the products you're trying to sell. With private label, we have brand registry. So as you are the brand owner, you can get other sellers kicked off your listing. And if you have issues with your product, brand registry has better support than general seller central or general seller support that you access through seller central. So brand registry gives you that leg up and gives you protection you just cannot get with arbitrage. And then the final point to consider, and there's probably other points as well, I'm just trying to cover as many as I could think of, is exit potential, i.e. if you wanted to sell your business at some point. If you're trying to sell an arbitrage business, what are you actually selling? You're selling a list of websites or retail shops that you buy products from. There's not really something to sell, if that makes sense. Whereas with private label, you've got your own brand on your own products and your own supply chain. So it's a much more sellable business. The exit potential is much higher. So overall for me, there is a clear winner, which is private label. The potential for it to be passive, the amount of money that you can make, the possibility of actually selling the business down the line versus arbitrage, which can be a good entry point for people that are actually first getting into Amazon FBA, especially if you've got a low budget. So I'm not saying that arbitrage does not work. And I personally know sellers that are selling millions of pounds worth of goods per year with arbitrage. So I know it's possible and it does work. But the biggest thing that puts me off with arbitrage is I always feel like every time I order a product that I'm playing basically a game of roulette on many fronts. So one, will the product actually get to me and get to Amazon in the first place without Amazon making any mistakes or the supplier themselves actually damaging the product or selling me the wrong product? Once it gets to Amazon, how many other people are going to jump on that same listing? Is the listing going to get price tanked? But the biggest concern for me goes back to the IP complaints. We know that every brand on Amazon, there is someone behind that brand. The question is, which one of those owners are going to have an issue with you deciding to sell that product as well? Now, there are some steps you can take when you're doing your sourcing to make sure or help reduce those risks as much as possible. But you're still playing roulette. You don't know. You're not going to order 50 or 100 of a product. And then the brand owner is going to come along and say, look, I did not approve this person to sell my product. Submit a complaint and you get a red flag against your account. And if you get too many red flags, your account will get suspended. So that is the thing that really puts me off. Now, if you go to the forums, the Amazon seller forums, they basically say that arbitrage is banned and you should not do it. I fall somewhere in the middle that it seems to be okay to do, but there are risks with it and you need to do a lot of research to make sure you're comfortable with those risks. And if something happens, you know how to handle it. But don't just go by a lot of the people that are talking arbitrage up as this amazing business model where you're not going to face any issues, as IP complaints will happen. If you're an arbitrage seller, you're going to get an IP complaint at some point, because no matter how much research you do, at some point you're going to buy a product and the brand owner is going to say, do you know what? They're either maybe they're changing their business model. Maybe they were happy people reselling. And then all of a sudden they don't want people reselling and they're going to become a direct seller themselves. And then everyone gets kicked off the listing and everyone gets an IP complaint against them. So that is why I prefer private label. All of the benefits I listed, arbitrage has its place. And if you want to start private label but don't quite have the budget, then arbitrage can be a good way of building that capital. But going forward, I'm going to continue to focus on private label. It is the superior model in my opinion. And arbitrage, you can make money with arbitrage, but the risks, in my opinion, are much higher, and the risk of losing your Amazon account is much, much higher. Now, if you're interested in starting Amazon private label, I'm going to pop up a video now. It's going to show you step by step everything you need to do to make your first £1,000 per month, and I'll see you guys over there.